Hare Krishna, everyone. So today we're going to do the last chapter of Canto 10. I'm sorry, Canto 2, chapter 10, okay, which is chapter 10. So Bhagavatam is the answer to all questions. It's a very, very important and wonderful chapter, very technical, but yet a lot there. Very, very important. So in the last chapter, which was answers by citing the Lord's version, we heard that after the Lord spoke the 4 verses to Lord Brahma, and then the Lord disappeared, later Brahma spoke the same truths to Narad Muni. And then Narad Muni received a request from Brahma to expand this. So there's a few verses, just a few, I'm going to read to you in the last chapter, which begins from text 41. And Brahma is speaking. Narada, the most dear of the inheritor sons of Brahma, always ready to serve his father, strictly follows the instructions of his father by his mannerly behavior and sense control. Narada very much pleased his father and desired to know all about the energies of Vishnu, the master of all energies. For Narada was the greatest of all sages and the greatest of all devotees, O king. The great sage Narada also inquired in detail from his father Brahma, the great-grandfather of all the universe, after seeing him well satisfied. Text 44. Thereupon, the supplementary Vedic literature, Srimad Bhagavatam, which was described by the personality of Godhead and which contains 10 characteristics, was told with satisfaction by his father Brahma to his son Narada. In succession, O king, the great sage Narada instructed Srimad Bhagavatam unto the unlimited powerful Vyasadeva, who meditated in devotional service upon the personality of Godhead, the absolute truth on the bank of the river Saraswati. So this chapter will have these 10 subject matters in Srimad Bhagavatam. Now, why is it so important that we study these 10 subject matters? Is because the entire Bhagavatam is based on these 10 topics. So by knowing ahead of time what these subject matters are, it really gives a perspective on why we are studying Bhagavatam, and also it's leading us to the Samam Bonam, which is how Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. To prove this, all the 9 topics which are contained in the first 9 cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam is being described, just to get to the 10th topic, which is Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, to establish that. So you can see how important this is, because the whole subject matter of Srimad Bhagavatam is that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is fully independent and fully powerful. He is the one who gives shelter to all, but he has no shelter. So I will begin with my first slide, the 10 subject matters in Srimad Bhagavatam, verses 1 and 2. Shri Shuka Vacha Atra Sargo Visargascha Sthanam Poshanam Utaya Manvantare Shanu Katha Nirodha Muktir Ashraya. So this is very interesting. So I'm going to read today the word to word also. Shri Shuka Vacha, Shri Shukadeva Goswami said, Atra, in this Srimad Bhagavatam, Sarga, statement of the creation of the universe, Visarga, statement of subcreation, Cha, also, Sthanam, the planetary systems, Poshanam, protection, Utaya, the creative impetus, Manvantar, changes of Manu, Isha Anukatha, the science of God, Nirodha, going back home, back to Godhead, Mukti, liberation, Ashraya, the Samam Bonam. Translation. Shukadev Goswami said, in Srimad Bhagavatam, there are 10 divisions of statements regarding the following: the creation of the universe, sub-creation, planetary systems, protection of the Lord by the Lord, the creative impetus, the change of Manus, the science of God, returning home back to Godhead, liberation, and the Samam Bonam. So there's two types of creation. The first one is called the Sarga, which Shukadev Goswami explains as the original creation, and Visarga, which is Brahma's creation. So, and then there's the creation of the planetary systems, protection by the Lord, the creative impetus, which means what is being created is our karma. And by this karma, this material universe is being maintained. This is the purpose of the material world. What is the purpose? Is to give the living entities ability to create. Then the creation of the different Manus and their descendants. And these are the executive rulers of the universe, the controllers and their pastimes, which are the Manus, the inhalations, different types, when everything gets wound up inside the Lord. The 4 different types, and there's 4 different types, okay? Then the final topics is called shelter of the 9 topics, the Samam Bonam, the absolute truth, the source of other topics, whom the other 9 take shelter of. And that is the Supreme Lord. So we'll get to the next slide. Srimad Bhagavatam covers the first 9 topics to establish the 10th, and that's verse 2. Translation. To isolate the transcendence of the Samam Bonam, the symptoms of the rest are described. The symptoms of the rest are described, sometimes by Vedic inference, sometimes by direct explanation, and sometimes by summary explanations given by the great sages. So all the 9 topics are being described in the 9 cantos, and they are described in different ways, he's saying. And what Shukadev Goswami is saying, how? Sometimes direct explanations, and sometimes through stories to make it easier. So this verse, this second verse, actually describes the actual purpose of describing the 9 topics, which is basically to illuminate the 10th topic, the shelter of other topics. And what are these 9 topics meant for? So that we are able to understand Krishna. And if we don't hear these 9 topics, we will not be able to understand the 10th topic. So unless we understand the Sarga, we cannot understand, the Sarga and the Visarga, the primary and secondary creation, the entirety of creation. We cannot understand the 10th topic, which is who is Krishna. We need to understand how everyone is inspired by the Lord with the potency to create. So in other words, unless we understand the Manus and the instructions and the avatars, how they become wound up within the Lord, unless we understand mukti or liberation of the soul from the bondage of material attractions, we cannot understand Krishna. All these topics have a relationship with Krishna. So we have these topics, but unless we understand a relationship with Krishna, my understanding will be incomplete. In other words, just even if we understand that we are the spirit soul and we have nothing to do with the body, but unless we understand our relationship with Krishna, that all these things come from him, it is incomplete. So here, Shukadev Goswami is trying to explain that this is the only topic of Srimad Bhagavatam, and other topics are supposed to simply shed light on this topic about Krishna. So now, until text 10, these 10 topics will be described by Shukadeva Goswami, starting text 3 till 10. Now, this very same these two verses, the first two verses, are also quoted by Krishna Das Kaviraj in Adi Leela, in order to establish why is he doing this, to describe the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He's also doing this to establish the fact that the 9 topics are dependent on the shelter of the Lord. So we'll talk a little bit more. Now, in Chaitanya Charitamrita, it's actually in one of the purports, it's very, very nicely described, these 10 topics. And I thought that it'll be nice to just go through the description one by one, okay? That will help us to understand these 10 topics and really get to become familiar with them. So the first one, like I said, was the Sarga. The first is Sarga, the second is Visarga, which is a secondary creation. So what is the Sarga? The first creation by Vishnu. The bringing forth of the 5 gross material elements, the 5 objects of sense perception, the 10 senses, the mind, intelligence, the false ego, and the total material energy or universal form. So all these material elements that we heard earlier, also in the second canto, that we will hear more in the third canto, this is all part of the Sarga creation, which means the raw ingredients that's coming from Vishnu. Now, without these raw ingredients, we cannot, nobody can create anything. First, we need the raw ingredients, right? So this is coming from Mahavishnu. Mahavishnu is coming from, we can trace it down all the way, trace it up all the way to Krishna, right? We have Shankarshan, Mahashankarshan, Balaram, and Krishna. So that's the first primary creation. Visarga, the secondary creation, or the work of Brahma in producing the moving and non-moving bodies in the universe. Sthana, which is the maintenance of the universe by the Lord. We know that maintenance is more important than even any other function, the destruction and the creation. Then Poshana, which is special care and protection by the Lord. Very, very important. Just like Krishna Das Kaviraj says that Prabhupada in one of the purports says, as a king maintains his kingdom and subjects, but nevertheless gives special attention to the members of his family, so the personality of Godhead gives special care to his devotees who are souls completely surrendered to him. Of course, Krishna is giving protection to everyone, but he specially gives protection to his devotees. And we can't blame Krishna for that. Then Uthaya, the urge for creation. This is the creative impulse. The urge, everybody has this urge for creation, and it all comes from him. Or initiative power. That is the cause for all inventions, according to the necessities of time, space, and objects. And that's basically fruitive activities. The urge for creation means fruitive activities, which keeps us in this cycle of birth and death. It gives us karma, which gives us our next body. Then the next topic, the 6th one, is Manav Avantar. The periods controlled by Manus who teach regulative principles for living beings who desire to achieve perfection in human life. So these are the religious principles that are set down by all these Manus. They're the lawgivers of mankind. The rules of Manu, as described in the Manu Samhita, guide the way to such perfection. 7th topic, Ishanu Katha, scriptural information regarding the personality of Godhead, his incarnations on earth, and the activities of his devotees. Scriptures dealing with these subjects are essential for progressive human life. So these are the different leelas that Krishna does for our benefit. Krishna is coming as different incarnations here so that we can go back to Godhead. He doesn't need to do that. He's already doing his pastimes in the spiritual world. 8th topic, Nirodha, the winding up of all energies employed in creation, which is the disillusion. These potencies are emanations from the personality of Godhead, who eternally lies in the Karna ocean. The cosmic creations manifested with his breath are again dissolved in due course. Ninth topic, Mukti, liberation of the conditioned souls encaged by the gross and subtle coverings of body and mind. When freed from all material affection, the soul, giving up the gross and subtle material bodies, can attain the spiritual sky in its original spiritual body and engage in transcendental loving service of the Lord in Vaikuntha or Krishna Loka. When the soul is situated in the original constitutional position of existence, he is said to be liberated. It is possible to engage in transcendental loving service to the Lord and become Jivan Mukta, a liberated soul, even while in this material body. So that's Mukti. Ashraya, this is the 10th topic, the transcendence, the summum bonum, from whom everything emanates, upon whom everything rests, and in whom everything merges after annihilation. He is the source and support of all. So in this way, we understand that Krishna is the Ashraya, which means that he's the shelter. And therefore, it becomes very, very important to study the science of Krishna, because we all need to know where we came from, our roots, because that's where we need to go back to our roots. Now, Srimad Bhagavatam accepts Sri Krishna as the shelter of all manifestations, because the Lord is the ultimate source of everything, the supreme goal of all. So this is what Srimad Bhagavatam wants to say, and this is what it accepts. So there's Ashraya, which is Krishna, and the Ashrita, which are the dependents, which need shelter. Okay, then just a little bit about where is all these things contained. And they're not like exact, but we mostly. For example, the Sarga is in Canto 1 and 2. Then Visarga is 2, 3, and 4. Sthanam is 3, 7, and 8 cantos, Poshnam is in all the cantos. Manvantars in 8th, 4th, and 9th. Lord's incarnations in the 4th and 9th. Nirodha, which is dissolution, annihilation, is 11 and 12. Creative impetus, which is the fruitive activities of the living entities, the impetus to create, is in the 3rd and 11th. So now from 3rd to 11th, we're going to hear about each of the topics in brief. That will take us to our next slide, Sarga and Visarga. Unless one reads the Srimad Bhagavatam, one will not understand Krishna as the source of all creation. So what happens is, why is this topic being discussed? Because only by reading Srimad Bhagavatam, we will understand that beyond the Visarga is the Sarga. In other words, without the source, Krishna, all this creation has no meaning, in other words. We will otherwise, like the material scientists, we will only come up to the level, we will only understand the Visarga, and we're going to become bewildered, like they are bewildered. Okay, because they will not have the answers to the origin, and they will come up with so many theories. Right? So text 3, the elementary creation of 16 items of matter, namely the 5 elements, fire, water, land, air, and sky, sound, form, taste, smell, touch, and the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, skin, and mind, is known as Sarga, whereas the subsequent resultant interaction of the modes of nature is called Visarga. So Prabhupada explains in the purport that unless one refers to the Veda, one will only see the Visarga creation, and they will skip the Sarga. And this is what is happening to the modern scientists. They want to trace it only back to the black hole, Prabhupada writes, right? And they cannot really actually say where the black hole comes from. So in other words, milk cannot come from the nipples of a goat, which means that matter cannot create life. So we've heard a lot of Sarga and Visarga, both in Canto 2 and 1, bit in 1. And now we're going to hear a lot of Sarga and Visarga in future in Canto 3 and 4 also. Why? Because we have to. In the beginning, we have to understand how great God is. And unless we understand how great God is, there's no incentive to take shelter of Him. So then the text 4 is, the Shukadeva Goswami is saying the right situation for the living entities is to obey the laws of the Lord and be in perfect peace of mind under the protection of the personality of Godhead. The manus and the laws are meant to give right direction in life. And the impetus for activity is the desire for fruitive work. So it's covered like 2 topics here. So, okay, then the text 5. The science of God describes the incarnations of the personality of Godhead and his different activities, together with the activities of his devotees. The merging of the living entity, along with its conditioned living tendency, with the mystic lying down of the Mahavishnu, is called the winding up of the cosmic manifestation. Liberation is the permanent situation of the form of the living entity after he gives up the changeable, gross, and subtle mature bodies. The Supreme One, who is celebrated as the Supreme Being or the Supreme Soul, is the Supreme Source. This is the 10th topic of the cosmic manifestation, as well as its reservoir and winding up. Thus, he is the Supreme Fountainhead. So now we'll move on to text 8 and to our next slide, which is, we are the controlled. Demigods are controllers, but all are controlled by the Supreme. These will cover verses 8 and 9. Translation. The individual person possessing different instruments of senses is called the Adhyatmic person, and the individual controlling deity of the senses is called Adidevik. The embodiment seen on the eyeballs is called the Adibhautik person. Now, what does this mean? So it's been explained here by Srila Prabhupada that again, this chapter is going to tell us about that the Lord is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He's the source and resting place. And the laws of Shastra and the teachings of the avatars are meant to tell us that Krishna is our protector, and we should not get entangled in the tendency to engage in fruitive activities. And in every verse, in every canto of Srimad Bhagavatam is leading us to this point of Golok Vrindavan. It's pointing towards that. And so in text, in verses 8 and 9, the same point is being made. It means that the way we understand this fact of Krishna being the ashraya, the shelter, is being done by dividing us, who we are, into 3 parts. So the soul, who identifies through the subtle body, is called the Adhyatmic person. So there's a gross body, right? And then there's a subtle body. So when we see with our gross body, through our gross eyes and ears and mouth and taste through our mouth, all these things, we also have a subtle body correspondingly. We have a subtle ear, we have subtle eyes. So the soul who's identifying with this subtle body instead of the gross body is called the Adhyatmic person. So we've heard of Adhyatmic miseries, right? Miseries pertaining to the body and mind. So this is Adhyatmic, the person, but this is the Adhyatmic person who's identifying with the subtle body. Then the individual controlling the external senses, the gross senses, is called the Adidevik person, which are basically the demigods. So the demigods, they control the senses. Living entities controls the senses from inside, and the demigods control the senses from outside. And the individual controlling the gross physical senses is the adibodhic person. So these are upadhis or designations that the living entities puts upon himself. All the different types of identity. So these are being so our identity is being divided into three to show the point that all these different people identities are still dependent on the Lord, and they are all three of them are interdependent on each other as well. So why? Because without the gross body, the subtle senses cannot work, and so on. So if you close your eyes and you think of someone cooking, for example, you can practically smell and taste these things, right? Have you ever experienced that? Not through the gross senses, but actually you're experiencing it through the subtle senses. For example, through the subtle smell, through subtle eyes, through subtle hearing. Is based on that, he gets a gross body. So according to the subtle senses, one gets a gross body. We know that we have to leave behind a gross body, but we take with us a subtle body. And how do we get these subtle senses? We get according to our desires, by which we get our subtle senses, which give us our gross body in our next life. So for example, now a good example would be that if you have a tongue and we like blood, then naturally we will develop a body of either a mosquito or a tiger. It depends, right? So in other words, without the gross body, which is the bhautik, remember the gross body, by which we identify with the gross body, that's the adibhautik person. The subtle body, without the gross body, the subtle body cannot work. And without the adidevic person, demigods, which is the demigods, the subtle nor the gross body, they both cannot work. So they are our controllers, right? So they depend, so each one depends on the other. But the Lord is the only one who's independent. So it's not, we can't understand everything completely, but at least we are getting a sense of how Bhagavatam is trying to establish this 10th topic through the help of all the others. That we are not the Ashraya, that different aspects of ourselves, the Adidevic, Adibhautik, and Adhyatmic, are not the Ashraya. For example, especially the Mayavadis, they will say that Jiva is the supreme. But this verse refutes that because it makes the point that we are definitely not the Ashraya. And another example is that how husband may give shelter to the wife may give shelter to the child gives shelter maybe to the cat or dog, the cat or dog gives shelter to the fleas, and the fleas may give shelter to the parasites. So yes, every living being is giving shelter to someone, but he's being sheltered himself. So where does the sheltering stop? It stops with Krishna, who gives shelter to all, but he himself has no shelter. So he is the ultimate shelter for all. So the jiva cannot be the ultimate shelter because he's dependent and has interdependent relationship with others. That's why he cannot be the ultimate. He's dependent. Okay. So the 9th translation, all three of the above mentioned stages of different living entities are interdependent. In the absence of one, another cannot be understood. But the Supreme Being who sees every one of them as the shelter of the shelter is independent of all, and therefore he's the supreme shelter. So in other words, Prabhupada in the pulpit, he describes how, the 4th chapter in the Bhagavad Gita, where the Arjuna is is representing himself as a forgetful of everything that happened in his past life. In other words, the jiva cannot remember what happens in his past life. But the Lord is not forgetful. The Lord tells him that you cannot remember, but I can remember. Billions and billions of years ago, who I spoke the Bhagavad Gita to. So he had spoken the Bhagavad Gita to the sun god billions of years ago. So Krishna, that's the difference between Krishna's body and our body, because his body is fully Sachidananda, it's fully full of knowledge and blissful and eternal. He knows what's going on in the present and also in the past, and also what will happen in the future. So in other words, he's fully capable of giving shelter to everyone, even to Paramatma within the heart, even to Brahman within the heart, even to all his incarnations. He is the source. And therefore, we should take shelter of him and serve the most independent. We have no choice, actually, even though we don't like to serve. So in the Canto 10, we see how he's doing so many sweet things like an ordinary person. He's dancing in the moonlight with the gopis. He's taking care of cows. But the difference is, and we also do the same thing, right? We do all these ordinary things that Krishna was doing. But the difference is that he's doing it not because he needs it, unlike us. He's doing it not for any material desire or cause, but he's doing it because he wants to reciprocate with his devotees. Whereas when we do it, we need to do it. We have a need. So that we'll move on to our next slide, which will explain how he's fully independent in his creation of the universe. That's text 10. The Lord is fully independent and powerful at all times, unlike the jivas. These will be covered from verses 10 to 16. Translation: after separating the different universes, the gigantic universal form of the Lord, Mahavishnu, which came out of the causal ocean, the place of appearance for the first Purusha avatar, entered into each of the separate universes, desiring to lie on the created transcendental water, Garbhodaka. So in other words, the Lord, he separates the universes. And then he enters into each universe and he lies on that water through his perspiration. Yeah. So now in the purport, Prabhupada explains this, that he says that after analysis of the living entities in the Supreme Lord, Paramatma, the independent source of all other living beings, Shukadev Goswami is now presenting the prime necessity for devotional service to the Lord. Now, why is Shukadev Goswami describing this creation again, right? It's again to make us understand that this is why we should do devotional services to the Lord. Because even in this form of creation, he's fully independent. And in other words, all Krishna's expansions or plenary portions or parts of the plenary portions are non-different from him. And each one of them is supremely independent. So why do we have to hear about this Purusha avatars? Why don't we go directly to the Leelas, the pastimes of the Lord? It's because Prabhupada explains that we will not be able to understand the Leelas of the Lord unless we understand the Lord's creation. The Lord's pastimes are meant, Prabhupada explains, for the very advanced devotees of the Lord. The neophyte devotees will misunderstand the transcendental activities of the Lord, and therefore the Lord's pastimes in the material sphere related to creation, maintenance, and destruction are very relishable for the mundane devotees as well as to pure devotees. Because anything about the Lord is very relishable for the pure. Just like, a parent loves a child, and the child may be doing something very foolish, but yes, that still becomes lovable. Right? And Prabhupada explains that just like the yoga system is based on bodily exercises, is meant for the person who's too much attached to the bodily conception of life. Similarly, the Lord's pastimes related to the creation and destruction of the Lord are for those who are too materially attached. Because such people, they need to understand the physical laws that govern this world and also about the lawmaker. And Prabhupada, of course, criticizes the blind scientists again, how they go past this lawmaker and they become very, very confused. Okay, so a few more verses before we get to the next slide. The Supreme Person, text 11, that Supreme Person is not impersonal and therefore is distinctively a nara or person. Therefore, the transcendental water created from the Supreme Nara is known as Nara. And because he lies down on the water, he's known as Narayana. One should definitely know that all material ingredients, activities, time, and modes, and the living entities who are meant to enjoy them all exist by his mercy only. And as soon as he does not care for them, everything becomes non existent. Now, this is a very interesting purport. I thought I'll read a little bit of that, which is the purport of verse 12. Therefore, the living entities are never the purushas or the factual enjoyers. As such, the spirit of enjoyment by the living entity in this material world is false. In the spiritual world, the living entities are pure in nature, and therefore they are associates in the enjoyment of the Supreme Lord. In the material world, the spirit of enjoyment of the living entities by dint of their own actions, karma, gradually fades by the laws of nature. So nobody can keep up their spirit of enjoyment. It will fade. And thus the illusory energy dictates in the ears of the conditioned souls that they should become one with the Lord. So this is the next step. After they get frustrated with enjoying this illusory energy, this material world, then they try to become one with the Lord. They try to find happiness in that. Then this is, Prabhupada writes, this is the last snare of the illusory energy. When the last illusion is also cleared off by the mercy of the Lord, the living entity again becomes reinstated in its original position and thus becomes actually liberated. So in other words, that's the first snare, and then that's the last snare. And then, of course, he comes back after learning his lesson there at some point, and he becomes reinstated as a servant of the Lord. For this attainment of liberation from the material clutches, the Lord creates the material world, maintains it for some time, 1,000 years of his measurement time, as stated in the previous verse, and then again annihilates it by his will. The living entity is therefore completely dependent on the mercy of the Lord, and all their so-called enjoyments by scientific improvement are crushed into dust when the Lord desires. So this is the purpose of the material world. 12. One should definitely know that all material ingredients, activities, time, and modes, and the living entities who are meant to enjoy them all exist by his mercy only. And as soon as he does not care for them, everything becomes non-existent. Next verse. The Lord, while lying on his bed of mystic slumber, generated the seminal symbol, golden in hue, through external energy out of his desire to manifest varieties of living entities from him alone. The lotus flower, which is golden, which comes from his navel. And then when Brahma is born, he manifests the different variety. 14. Just hear from me how the potency of his lordship divides one into three, called the controlling deity entities, the controlled entities, and the material bodies, in the manner mentioned above. The three types of living entity that we talked about. So what's being explained here is that the Lord comes as Virata Purusha again. We are hearing that. And as we heard in the earlier chapters, this is the universal form of the Lord, which is not exactly the form of the Lord, but is a form within matter, and how through which he manifests the material world. So in other words, he expresses his desire through the Virat Purusha, and from the Virat Purusha, the three types of living persons come, the Adidevic, Adibhautic, and Adhyatmic persons come, and the purpose of this is to generate the living entities in the material world, in conditional state. So why? Because we can express our desires. The material world becomes a place where we can express our desires. And in this way, we get different karma, different bodies. Okay. So now we'll move on to our next slide, which is our last one, I think. Next slide. The Lord manifests senses and the controlling deities through Virata Rupa. And these are verses 17 to 45. So I will read just a couple, and I will just read it off from a PowerPoint. The living force being agitated by the Virat Purusha generated hunger and thirst, and when he desired to drink and eat, the mouth opened. Because the Virata Rupa manifests the mouth, we have mouths. The demigods have mouths, and we use the mouths depending on the three divisions of living entities. But ultimately, it is dependent on the Virata Purusha. So ultimately, everything is based from Krishna. But what is Krishna based on? So this is what is being explained in these verses. That when Krishna desired something, we also got the benefit of possessing that very thing. So text 18, from the mouth, the palate became manifested, and thereupon the tongue was also generated. After this, all the different tastes came into existence so that the tongue can relish them. When the Supreme Lord desired to speak, speeches were vibrated from his mouth. Then the controlling deity fire was generated from the mouth. But when he was lying in the water, all these functions remained suspended. In this way, it goes on to many, many different parts of the body of the Lord, of the Virata Purusha. It says that when the sages desired to hear about him, the ears came. When the Lord desires to work, our hands and legs came. When the Lord desired to evacuate, our anus came. When the Lord desired to eat, drink, our inside organs came. When the Lord desired to think, our heart, which is the mind, came. Due to different modes of nature, there are higher, lower bodies. The Lord's activities in material world are simply to counteract the atheistic view that material nature is the creator. In this way, we can go through all the different verses which describes how we actually came to have these different parts of our body is through, and how Krishna is ultimately the source. And these elements, these different elements in our body, they don't just appear on its own by chance. In other words, all matter is coming from life. So I think I'll stop here. We could read more, but I think that this is very easy to understand and to do that. Now, there's one little purport that Prabhupada explains very nicely. So I think I'm going to read that part of that, and which is the purport of 18. This gradual process of evolution suggests the explanation of the controlling deities Adideva, because Varuna is a controlling deity for all relishable juices. In other words, Prabhupada is explaining how when he generated the different organs, the senses, the sense objects, or the senses are 11, right? The 5 working senses, 5 knowledge gathering senses, and the mind. Right? And then we have the sense objects, right? So all these things, which is smell, taste, and all these 5 things, and then we have Then, so all these elements, they all have a controlling deity. So at the same time, Krishna is also creating the controlling deity. And he's giving, Prabhupada is giving the example, that when we want to taste something, so there's the mouth, the resting place for the tongue, and then which wants to taste different juices. And the controlling deity for the taste is Varuna. So in other words, Prabhupada is explaining how Varuna was also generated along with the development of the tongue. The tongue and the palate being instrumental are Adi Bhutam. So remember, these are the identity, the living entity who controls the physical senses. And then, which are the forms of matter. And the functioning deity is which actually experiences through the subtle body, is the Adideva, whereas the person undergoing we already described that. And of course, the controlling deity are the demigods, the Adidevic. So very nicely, Prabhupada is going on and on to explain this so that we understand. So we understand that Krishna is creating this wonderful body, right, of every jiva. Do you think that he's creating for us just to enjoy ourselves in terms of having a nice car, house, eating, sleeping, and drinking, and all these things, and creating a family? Because it cannot be, because it's destroyed so quickly, right? A few years and it's destroyed. So the purpose of entire material creation is not simply so that we can come here and enjoy, and then our senses, right, without Krishna. In other words, he's explaining why this elaborate arrangement is being created. And that he explains in text 19, in the purport, Prabhupada explains that how when we misuse, he goes on to explain the purpose behind it. In other words, when we misuse something, a sense, right? For example, when we misuse a tongue, which is meant for eating prasadam, then we get an appropriate tongue, which is better suited for that. In other words, we get the tongue of a pig, he explains, right? Because a pig, he has no discrimination of what he eats. He enjoys something which we consider very abominable. So every living entity, he develops a taste in terms of different modes of nature. So we are not meant to taste without discrimination. That's why life is not simply meant to enjoy our senses. We have to put discrimination there. We have to put philosophy there. So everything is happening by the grace of the Lord. So in other words, this knowledge that we are hearing today from chapter 10, this is real knowledge. The other knowledge that we get from mundane things is not knowledge. It's actually ignorance. And we as devotees try to give this knowledge to others so that people can understand the purpose of life. So in this way, all the different verses talk about different parts of the Virat Rupa. Okay, so I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mataji, for giving such a wonderful explanation on so deep philosophical topic, and really meaning it helps all of us to understand and appreciate and be serious about our spiritual lives. So thank you very much. And I think today we can have questions simultaneously because the topics are so deep that this will help us to connect better. So if we have questions, we can deal with questions first, and then we can have this guidebook presentation by me. So we welcome the questions by the audience, by devotees. If anybody have questions, you can please raise hand. We are trying to give questions priority today because this maintains continuity. Mataji has just finished the session, and we can have questions, and then we can continue with the guidebook presentation. Yes, Rati Kelly Mataji.
Hare Krishna, Mataji. Dandot pranams.
Hare Krishna.
Mataji, thank you so much for the wonderful session. I have a question on the different features that have arisen by the Lord's desire. So I am not clear what is the heart. Can you please explain?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mataji.
Yeah, it's not very easy to explain this, but they say that the mind is not, that brain is not the place. Generally we think that the mind is up here, in the brain, but brain is simply an organ. It's not, it's just gross matter. The mind is actually, is within the heart, is here in the heart, and that's what is distinguished, unlike what we think what we think from the modern perspective, is that the mind is in the brain. It's actually in the heart. And that's why the heart is where Krishna resides. And by the heart, when our heart is changed, then obviously our mind becomes purified, you see. And the heart changes when we hear about Krishna, and when we engage in devotional service. Then our heart, which is very, very dirty and contaminated, we heard in the first canto how the dirty heart, and how that heart needs to be scrubbed, is really the mind. Is really the mind. And the mind is thinking, feeling and willing, so which basically is the seat of all desires. And the intelligence is something that executes those desires. So really the mind is a key. So if our mind is purified, if our thinking, willing, and feeling is purified, the intelligence automatically becomes more spiritual instead of material intelligence, which acts on a material platform. And then of course, our false ego changes into pure ego, by which we identify with the fact that I'm a servant of Krishna, and not as this body, belonging to this material world, but we are actually a spirit soul. So that false ego, which is even finer, that is really the crux of the fact, is really the key as to why we have this material body. And that becomes purified. And of course, then the soul becomes established in its constitutional position. So this process is, is basically stemming from purifying the mind. And that is why a process of devotion service, by engaging in that, our mind gradually becomes purified. Okay, and that mind is situated within the heart, the seat of all existence. So this is not something that is physical. It's very, very subtle, right? And this description of the three types of living entities was very helpful. I mean, it's very technical, so we can't grasp the whole thing. But even if you get just a little idea, of the three types of identities we have, and how this subtle body, which is the adhyatmic person, how he is so important to change the subtle body that we carry with us to our next body. But we are dependent on the physical body. In other words, if we have the body of a pig, then the subtle body doesn't have much of a chance, right? So in that sense, it's dependent. And the physical body is dependent on the subtle body. And both of them are dependent on the demigods, the controlling deity who controls both of them. And that we will hear more explanation on that part in Canto 3. So we have these three identities, which are giving us three types of mysteries, isn't it? It's now being connected, the three types of mysteries that we heard earlier, and we will hear a lot more, it's all connected to the three types of bodies, the identities we have in this world. Okay, this is a long explanation, but this is what I understand. Hare Krishna. Was it clear? Hare Krishna. Ratikeli?
Yes.
Yes, Mataji, I wasn't able to unmute myself. Sorry.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Yeah. I can. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
So is it correct to think that the heart is the heart is a subtle organ, or I'm sorry if this is a weird
No, no,
question,
no,
but
no. Yeah.
a physical or a subtle element, the
Well, there's
heart?
both. I mean, there is a heart there, and so with all the different, blood vessels and all that stuff, and so there's a physical element to it, but the heart really is the mind. So when we talk
Okay.
on the subtle platform, that's the mind. And on a
Okay.
physical platform is the heart.
Okay, Mataji.
I mean,
That's
this is
clear.
how I would understand. I could be totally wrong, but this is how I understand, that there's a physical, and that's what we are hearing today in this class, is the physical element and the subtle element, right? The physical element are all these different bodies, the different organs and all those things that we have, and then the subtle elements are the mind, intelligence, ego, these are the, so in other words, the whole body, the components of the entire body, there is the 5 gross elements. Okay, so the 5 gross elements: earth, water, fire, air, and ether. You can mute yourself now, it's okay. I
Yes,
know
thank you.
there's children and all that. Yeah, so there's earth, water, fire, and ether. Okay, so these are the 5 great elements. They are called the Mahabhuta. And then there's the subtle elements: the false ego, intelligence, and also the 3 modes of mature nature. These are all subtle. Then there's 5 senses for acquiring knowledge, which are the ears, eyes, nose, tongue, and skin. These are the organs by which we gather knowledge, right? Then there's 5 working senses, which are the voice, legs. These are working senses: voice, legs, hands, anus, and genitals. And above these 10 senses, there is the mind, and which is within, which is the subtle one, and which is called the sense within. Sometimes it's called the sense within. Therefore, including the mind, there are 11 senses. And then sometimes they say there's 16 elements, and sometimes they say there's 24 elements. Why? Because then there's and we're going to hear a lot of this in the 3rd canto. There's 5 objects of the senses also, which is the smell, taste, form, touch, and sound. Now, all these combine to become the 24 elements. And sometimes the 25th is called the soul. So this is called Sankhya philosophy, which will be in the 3rd canto. So Sankhya philosophy, it analyzes all these different 24 elements. And so in this way, we can understand the soul's field of activity. So he's got all these elements to work with, right? So depending on the mind, where the mind is, and the type of body that we have, like remember the 3 entities depending on each other, accordingly we get appropriate body that becomes our field of activity. In other words, the field of activity for an earthworm is much smaller than our field of activity, right? The earthworm simply digs into the hole and lives in the dark. So the field of activity is very small, right? Our field of activity is a lot bigger. On another animal's field of activity will be bigger. So in this way, so all these elements are giving us different fields of activity. So in this way, by engaging in different fields according to what we are allotted with, we really have no choice at this point, right? According to that, we do different activities. And according to that, we get different types of happiness and distress. And all these heat and cold, and all these not happiness and distress, desire, and hatred, love, all these things. These are just basically ways where we experience suffering.
Yes, Mataji. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'm eagerly waiting for 3rd canto, studying with you. Thank you, Mataji.
Archana Mataji.
Hare Krishna Mataji. Thank you for the wonderful explanation. So actually my question was also kind of answered in the previous answer that you spoke to her about. So I had a question on how the demigods, how do we accept them? I mean, how do we understand demigods to be the controllers, and then you mentioned it will be elaborated in the third canto.
Yes,
And,
it will be really, it will be elaborated in the third canto.
Yeah.
Because basically Krishna is making the point here, and the Shastra is making the point that we always controlled by some higher living entities. Now, demigods are definitely much more elevated, right? They are like powerful people, and they control us. So what are we? In other words, if when we become proud of our maybe a sense of hearing, or we are we can hear very well, or our beauty, our skin or whatever, is so foolish because everything is controlled by somebody else, right? So in other words, we are very much we have to see it in that light. As devotees, we have to see that we are so helpless, basically. We are given a set of field of activity, and we have to live within that, really.
Yeah. Thank you, Mataji.
Any other question?
Okay. So we can move on, Rati, to your section.
Yes, Mataji. So I will share the screen now for guidebook presentation. So this chapter again starts with the story summary, which is very, very interactive, lot of pictures. And in most of the chapters, there are some poetic expressions also, which is also visible in this chapter. So it starts with Sukadev Goswami was very pleased that the sages of Naimisharanya were so inquisitive about the transcendental pastimes of the Lord. They were wise and knew that the soul experiences pleasure only by hearing the transcendental pastimes of Lord Shri Krishna. And it goes on like this in a very interactive manner. Uh, Also, when it is when the explanation is given about how sarga and visarga took place, so similar pictures are also provided for child to understand better. There is also poetic expression, which is seen in many of the chapters story summaries, which is again very lively for children, so we can recite the poems together. And then there are key messages which can help children to memorize the important points to apply them in their lives. Understanding the story questions, which are again very practical and help children to get a better understanding and the feel of the entire story. Then there are higher order thinking questions, which are always advisable that a teacher or the parent can read them in advance and make a note of them. And children, while reading the translations, children can reflect upon these questions, which helps them to go deep into the philosophy. Then there are activities. So beginning with critical thinking activities, this is one very wonderful way of Bhagavatam at your fingertips. So there is a resource in which we have, resource one, in which we have just the outline of these two hands. So children have to write the main 10 topics of Srimad Bhagavatam, and then they can also place them on the gloves, and they can have their own, Bhagavatam gloves. So they were very excited to do this activity, all the 10 main topics of Srimad Bhagavatam at their fingertips. And then there is this Bhagavatam mind map also. So again, this is very nice of the guidebook that it helps children in different ways. Meaning same topics are reinforced in various manners, because every child has their own unique way of learning and experiencing and understanding things. So once they will make a puppet show, once they will make a some creativity, some piece of art, then they will make some story show, then they will make a poem like this. Meaning same concepts are being reinforced through various activities, and various child is engaged with these topics at various levels. So it helps really children go deep, and they understand and even memorize the topic so well while doing these activities. So this is this Bhagavatam mind map. Again, children have to place Srimad Bhagavatam or Krishna in between, and then 10 bubbles have to be made, and children have to, their own creative way, they have to express these 10 topics. And then there are these sentence starters, wherein starting of the sentence is given and they have to complete it on the basis of what they have understood from the story. Then analogy activity, very nice way of helping children to understand how creation took place in relating it to water cycle. So there is this manifest and unmanifest, and a comparison is also made from the shlokas of Bhagavad Gita, and children have to compare, how clouds come in their manifest and unmanifest form, and when it rains, it is in the form of water. So again, the clouds are there, but they are unmanifest in the unmanifest form. And then again, when evaporation takes place, they again become water vapor and form clouds. So again, they become in their manifest state. Similarly, children have to create their own cycle of creation, beginning from how Mahavishnu initially this primary creation happened, and then Brahmaji made secondary creation, and then they can represent some form of material creation, wherein my daughter has represented it in the senses she has drawn. And then finally, at the end of at the end of the yuga, the Lord comes in Rudra form, and the entire creation is annihilated. So this is how they can understand and compare water cycle with the cycle of creation. So this is an extension activity, and then there is introspective activity wherein children can reflect upon why Lord comes and creates and does these pastimes, which is their favorite pastime, what do they learn from their favorite pastime, and this is an introspective activity. Then there are artistic activity, nutshell sculpture, wherein again these 10 topics coming in a form of art. Children have to create, on either on a sheet or on a piece of cloth. They can create these. They can make images of these 10 important topics. And then there is this very interesting elements memory game. So these 16 elements that are primary source of primary creation. So these 16 elements, children will create small slips, and they can represent them either in words or in drawing or both. And then it can be played in teams. So one child in pairs, meaning one child will hide few elements from it, and the other child has to guess. So this is another interesting way wherein children can learn these 16 elements on tips, and they also tend to acknowledge how creation is taking place. Then get the words right. There are words are jumbled up in the fill in the blanks form, and they have to put them rightly. Again, word jumble matching on the basis of the sense organs and the action that these sense organ perform. So the words are jumbled, they have to correct and match accordingly. And then after reading the story summary, they have to choose any three of these senses and say that how they have originally, why did these senses originally appear. So because Lord has these desires to, then in Virata Purusha, uh, uh, these desires were manifested, and then these senses developed in our own bodily systems also. So this is how it can be explained. And then punctuation practice, keywords, synonym and antonym definitions, and again sequencing of the story, which again helps children to understand the entire story in a form of sequence. And then this word search. All these activities really help children to be focused into these philosophical topics and go deep and understand them in a fun manner. And then this crossword, the across and down hints are given, and they have to uh, make their own words. And then finally the answers. So all answers are also provided for so that parents can also get back and check whether children are going on the right track or not. So that's it. If anybody has any other question from guidebook or from the chapter, we can still have. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Hare Krishna, everyone. Hare Krishna.